He built an empire on blood and betrayal, but the moment she touched his hand, the killer turned human. And in his world, love wasn't salvation. It was the beginning of the end. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started, and don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. The rain fell like judgment over Chicago, hammering the bulletproof windows of the penthouse suite where Dominic Kane watched his city burn in miniature. Not literally, not tonight, anyway, but in the way empires always smoldered, slow, controlled, profitable. Below, ambulance lights painted the streets in rotating red and blue, another overdose in Pilsen, another shooting in Englewood, another transaction in the vast machinery that had made him untouchable. He stood in shadow, 52 floors above consequence, wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most men earned in a month. At 43, Dominic had perfected the art of stillness, the predator's patience that made weaker men confess their betrayals before he even asked. His face was all hard angles and old scars, the kind that came from climbing out of Southside poverty with blooded knuckles and borrowed courage. Grey had begun threading through his dark hair, distinguished rather than aging, each silver strand a trophy from a war he'd won. The Mexicans are moving product through the west side again, Julian said from behind him, his lieutenant's voice careful, measured. Hernandez thinks we didn't notice. Dominic didn't turn. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see the Willis Tower, the Art Institute, the glittering wealth of Michigan Avenue, all of it dancing on strings he'd spent 20 years learning to pull. Hernandez thinks many things. Most of them wrong. You want me to send a message? I want you to send the message. Dominic's voice carried no heat, no anger, only the flat certainty of physics. Actions, consequences, the mathematics of fear. Make sure his suppliers understand that charity has limits. Julian left without another word. That was the empire. Efficient, brutal, clean. Dominic had built it from nothing, from the 15-year-old kid who'd watched his father cough blood into a factory floor because injury meant termination and termination meant starvation. He'd built it from stolen cars and street corners, from knowing which alderman stayed bought and which cops looked away. He'd built it from blood, other people's mostly, though he'd spilled his share. The rain intensified, and for a moment, his reflection ghosted across the window, a spectre in expensive fabric, haunting his own life. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Riviera Development cleared City Council. Congratulations. $40 million in luxury condos where tenements used to stand, displacing families who'd lived there for generations. Progress, they called it. Gentrification, others named it. Dominic called it Thursday. The empire demanded feeding, and sentiment was a luxury for men who could afford weakness. He'd learned that lesson watching his mother clean other people's houses on her knees, working herself into an early grave for wages that barely bought dignity. Never again, he'd promised himself over her casket. Never powerless, never poor, never weak. The penthouse was immaculate, all steel and leather and original art that existed purely as investment. No photographs, no sentimentality, nothing that could be leveraged against him. His bedroom was Spartan, his kitchen unused. He ate at restaurants he partially owned, slept with women who understood transactional intimacy, and trusted exactly 3 people in the world, all of whom were on his payroll. It was, by any measure, exactly the life he'd designed. So why did it feel like standing in a tomb? Across the city, in a church basement that smelled of ancient coffee and newer hope, Imani Wright was explaining mathematics to people who'd forgotten how to believe in numbers. 37%, she said, her voice carrying across the 40-some faces packed into folding chairs. That's how much violent crime has increased in Bronzeville in the last 3 years. 37%. And you know what else increased by almost the same amount? She clicked to the next slide, her laptop connected to a projector that had seen better decades. Luxury development permits. High-end retail licenses. Property values that push families out and bring in, what? Wine bars. Artisanal coffee shops. And just enough legitimate business to wash all that dirty money clean. Imani was 32 but carried herself with the authority of someone who'd earned every inch of space she occupied. Her skin was deep brown, her hair in natural coils she refused to straighten for anyone's comfort, her eyes holding the particular intensity of someone who'd seen injustice and decided to make it her business. She wore jeans and a Bronzeville Strong t-shirt, sneakers that had walked 10,000 miles of neighborhood canvas, and the only jewelry she owned, her grandmother's small gold cross. "Mrs. Henderson," Imani said, gesturing to an elderly woman in the third row, "tell them what happened to your grandson." The woman's voice cracked. Caught in a crossfire outside the new boutique hotel on 47th. 16 years old, on a roll, walking home from his job at the library. The bullet wasn't meant for him. But Dante's still in a wheelchair, and the shooters. She couldn't finish. Were never caught, Imani completed. Because witness intimidation is its own industry in neighborhoods where power answers to money, not justice. And the money. She advanced the slide again, showing a web of shell companies and LLC registrations. Follows a pattern. Always does. Leads back to the same networks, the same names hiding behind corporate structures. Including one name that comes up again and again. She put Dominic Kane's photograph on the screen. No one gasped. His face was familiar enough, though usually in the business section. Local developer invests in Southside Renaissance. Philanthropist donates to youth programs. Public relations alchemy, turning blood into gold into headlines. Dominic Kane, Imani said, letting the name sit in the air like accusation and evidence. Legitimate businessman, according to the Tribune. Community benefactor, if you ask the politicians whose campaigns he funds. And somehow, mysteriously, everywhere his developments go, the drug trade follows. Everywhere his money flows, violence spikes. Coincidence? "What can we do?" someone called from the back. Imani smiled, not with joy, but with the fierce determination that had made her a community organizer at 24 and a force the city council couldn't ignore by 30. "We shine light. We document. We make noise until the right people have to listen." Next week, Kane is hosting a fundraiser at the Palmer House, $2,000 a plate, celebrating his latest investment in Chicago's future. "I'm going to be there." "They won't let you in," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "I bought a ticket." Imani's smile widened. "Maxed out my credit card, but some conversations are worth it." Time Mr. Kane heard from the people his empire is built on. What do you think drives someone to build an empire from blood, survival, ambition, or something darker? Drop your thoughts below. The meeting dispersed into coffee and conversation, but Imani stayed behind, staring at Dominic Kane's photograph on the screen. She'd researched him for months, following money through labyrinthine corporate structures, connecting dots that Chicago's finest conveniently missed. He was handsome in that dangerous way. Hard features softened by expensive grooming, eyes that had probably been warm once, before whatever made him chose power over humanity. She'd seen dozens like him, men who justified destruction as business, who measured success in dollars rather than lives saved or communities strengthened. But something in his photograph bothered her, a ghost of something behind those calculated eyes. Pain, maybe. Or just the nothing that came from killing your own conscience for profit. You really think confronting him will change anything? Imani turned to find Marcus. No, she'd promised to remember his preferred name. Jerome standing in the doorway, her assistant organizer and the closest thing she had to family in Chicago. Probably not, she admitted. But silence definitely changes nothing. Someone has to look him in the eye and say, "We see you. We know what you are." Jerome shook his head, affectionate exasperation on his face. "You know what they say about poking dragons? That someone eventually has to, or everyone just keeps getting burned." Imani shut down the projector, gathering her materials. "Besides, I'm counting on him being too image-conscious to do anything stupid at his own fundraiser. Men like that need their respectability." She had no way of knowing that respectability was the only armor Dominic Kane had left, and that she was about to crack it beyond repair. The Palmer House ballroom dripped with old money and new ambitions, crystal chandeliers casting champagne light across faces that smiled with practiced insincerity. Dominic moved through the crowd like a shark through familiar waters, acknowledged, feared, never quite touched. His tuxedo was bespoke, his cufflinks platinum, his expression the carefully calibrated warmth of a man who'd learned to weaponize charm. "Dominic, magnificent event," Alderman Pritchard gushed, his jowls quivering with enthusiasm and the 4 drinks he'd already consumed. "That Bronzeville project, transformative, truly transformative." "Chicago deserves investment," Dominic replied, the words smooth as the whiskey he wasn't drinking. He never drank at these events, never compromised the clarity that kept him 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Especially neighborhoods that have been overlooked for too long. Overlooked. Such a sanitary word for systematically destroyed. He excused himself, scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of someone always cataloging exits and threats. The fundraiser was for a youth literacy program, legitimate, even noble, and every dollar donated would be matched by his foundation. Good optics, better tax strategy, and it cost him nothing he couldn't reclaim 10 times over through the developments the goodwill enabled. That's when he saw her. She moved wrong for the room, too direct, too purposeful, like a spark in a powder magazine. While everyone else glided and networked, she cut through the crowd with singular focus, her burgundy dress simple against the sea of designer gowns. She was beautiful in that way that had nothing to do with decoration, all fierce intelligence and banked fire, her natural hair styled in elegant coils, her brown skin glowing against the deep red fabric. And she was walking straight toward him. Mr. Kane. Her voice carried enough to turn nearby heads. Imani Wright, Bronzeville Community Alliance. I bought a ticket because I wanted you to see the face of someone whose neighborhood you're destroying. The ballroom didn't quite gasp, but the nearby conversation stuttered. Dominic felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine surprise. He studied her, noting the slight tremble in her hands that contradicted her steady voice, the defiance in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly how dangerous this was and had decided courage mattered more. Ms. Wright. He kept his voice even, almost warm. That's quite an accusation for a literacy fundraiser. Is it? She held his gaze, unflinching. Because literacy matters less when children are dodging bullets walking to school. And those bullets somehow follow your developments like a shadow follows light. Someone nearby cleared their throat. Alderman Pritchard looked ready to intervene, but Dominic raised a subtle hand. I'll handle this. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere less. He gestured vaguely at their audience. Public. Why? You prefer your consequences private. A smile tugged at his mouth. Actual, unrehearsed amusement. When was the last time someone had challenged him directly? When had anyone looked at him with something other than fear or greed or calculation? I prefer conversations where we might actually hear each other over the string quartet. He gestured toward the balcony doors. 5 minutes. Unless you'd rather perform for an audience that frankly doesn't care about either of our positions. She hesitated, and he saw her calculating, wondering if this was a trap, weighing her options, deciding whether courage extended beyond the public confrontation into actual dialogue. 5 minutes, she agreed. The balcony overlooked Michigan Avenue, the April night cool enough to justify the way Imani wrapped her arms around herself. Inside, the party continued, oblivious. Out here, the city stretched before them, Dominic's empire rendered in glass and steel and streetlights. You're not wrong, he said, and watched her head snap toward him. About the violence following development. The correlation exists. That's not an answer. It's an acknowledgement. He leaned against the railing, and something in his posture shifted, less predator, more tired. You think I'm the source. I understand why. But you're looking at symptoms and calling them causes. Don't. Her voice hardened. Don't give me it's complicated speech. I've researched you for 8 months. I know your shell companies, your LLC structures, the way money flows through your organizations. You're not some passive real estate investor who happens to be unlucky with violence. No, he agreed. I'm not. The admission hung between them, honest and damning. Imani blinked, clearly not expecting it. I built an empire, Dominic continued, his voice lower now, meant only for her. From nothing. From watching my father die because poverty is its own kind of violence, slow and legal and just as fatal. I learned the rules of power, Ms. Wright, not the ones they teach in civics class, but the real ones. And I used them. To justify dealing drugs, running protection rackets, displacing families. To survive. Then to win. Then to. He stopped, something flickering across his face. It matters less why you build something than what it becomes, doesn't it? The empire doesn't care about origin stories. Is that supposed to make me sympathize? No. He finally looked at her fully, and Imani felt her breath catch at the exhaustion behind his eyes, something hungry and hollow that expensive suits couldn't hide. It's supposed to be honest. You came here for honesty. Here it is. You're right. About most of it. And there's nothing you can do about it that hasn't been tried by better funded, better connected people than you. So I should what? Give up? Let you keep destroying communities? You should be careful. His voice dropped further, and now it carried warning. Not from me. I don't hurt people who speak truth. But my empire has many rooms, Ms. Wright, and not all of them answer to me as completely as they should. Someone paying attention to you might draw the wrong kind of attention. Is that a threat? It's a genuine concern from someone who understands how these systems work. He straightened, and the moment of vulnerability closed like a door. You're brave. Possibly foolish. But brave matters. I admire that, even when it's aimed at me. Imani stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the monster she'd built in her research. He was both, somehow, capable of violence and this strange, almost protective consideration. It was more unsettling than simple villainy. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because. He paused, seeming to genuinely consider it. Because you looked at me like I was human enough to argue with. Most people just fear or want something from me. You treated me like someone capable of being wrong, which implies being capable of being right. It's been a long time since anyone assumed I had that choice. Before she could respond, the balcony doors opened. Julian appeared, his expression neutral but his eyes communicating urgency. Sir, we have a situation. Dominic's mask snapped back into place instantly. What kind? The kind that needs your immediate attention. South side. He nodded, then turned back to Imani. I have to go. Thank you for the most interesting conversation I've had in years, even if you think I'm the devil. I don't think you're the devil, she said, surprising herself. I think you made choices that hurt people. That's worse, devils don't choose. Something in his expression cracked, just for a second, just enough to show the wound beneath. Then he was moving, Julian at his side, disappearing back into the ballroom and the empire that demanded him. Imani stood alone on the balcony, her heart racing, trying to understand why confronting him felt less like victory and more like vertigo, like glimpsing something unexpected beneath the monster's mask. Something almost like recognition. The situation was a bloodbath. Dominic arrived at the warehouse in Englewood to find 2 of his men dead, 3 injured, and enough bullet casings to populate a firing range. The Mexican cartel had responded to his earlier message with one of their own, emphatic, violent, territorial. Hernandez is escalating, Julian said, surveying the damage with professional detachment. This was personal. They took time with Rodriguez before they killed him. Dominic crouched beside the body, noting the torture marks that spoke of information extraction and recreational cruelty. Rodriguez had been with him for 12 years, loyal, effective, someone who'd earned trust in an industry where trust was currency. The old Dominic, the one who'd built this empire, would have already planned the retaliation. Calculated, disproportionate, sending a message that made the cost of defiance prohibitively high. He'd done it dozens of times, building his reputation on the rubble of anyone foolish enough to challenge him. But tonight, standing over Rodriguez's mutilated corpse, all he could think about was Imani Wright's voice. You made choices that hurt people. That's worse. Devils don't choose. Boss. Julian was waiting for orders, for the cold mathematics of vengeance. Clean this up, Dominic said quietly. Move Rodriguez's family somewhere safe. Set them up, college fund for his kids, house in his wife's name, enough money that they never worry. And Hernandez. Dominic stood, his joints protesting. When had he gotten old? I'll handle Hernandez personally. But not tonight. Tonight, we bury our dead with dignity. Julian's eyebrow raised fractionally, the closest he ever came to showing surprise. In 20 years, he'd never heard Dominic postpone retaliation. Hesitation was weakness. Sentiment was fatal. You sure about that? No, Dominic admitted. But do it anyway. He didn't go home. Instead, he found himself driving through Bronzeville at 3 a.m, the streets quiet except for the occasional patrol car and the people for whom night was the only time they felt safe. He passed buildings he owned, developments he'd funded, the gentrification his money had purchased. And he saw them, the displaced, the destroyed, the collateral damage of his empire. The homeless man sleeping in the doorway of what used to be his apartment building before luxury condos took its place. The shuttered corner store where Mrs. Henderson's grandson had been shot, now a boutique charging $20 for a cup of coffee. Progress. Investment. Transformation. Blood. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. Mr. Kane. Imani's voice, uncertain now, stripped of its earlier defiance. Ms. Wright. It's 3 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry. I just... A pause, then words that tumbled out fast, like she was afraid of losing courage. There was a shooting tonight. Corner of 47th and King Drive. 2 kids caught in crossfire. One of them was in my after-school program. 8 years old. She's at Mercy Hospital, and they don't know if she'll... Her voice broke. Dominic pulled over, something cold settling in his chest. What do you need? I don't know why I'm calling you. I shouldn't be calling you. But you said something about not all of your empire answering to you. Was that about Hernandez? The Mexican cartel operating in Bronzeville. How do you know that name? I organize communities, Mr. Kane. That means I listen to them. And I'm hearing that tonight's shooting wasn't random, it was a message meant for you. These kids just happened to be there. She inhaled sharply. So I'm asking, is that true? Did an 8-year-old girl catch a bullet meant as a message to you? He could lie. Should lie. Instead, yes. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that he thought she'd hung up. Then fix it, she finally said, her voice raw with fury and grief. You built this. You profit from this. So fix it, or admit that every word you said on that balcony about being capable of choice was just another con. She hung up. Dominic sat in his car, phone still pressed to his ear, surrounded by the sleeping neighborhood his empire was devouring. On the seat beside him, Rodriguez's blood still stained his sleeve, literal blood mixed with all the metaphorical blood he'd spilled building his kingdom. You made choices that hurt people. For the first time in 20 years, Dominic Kane felt something he'd thought he'd killed, shame. And beneath that, even more dangerous, the possibility that he could still choose differently. That possibility felt like waking up in a coffin and realizing you'd been buried alive. Or maybe, just maybe, like finally clawing toward light. He called Julian at 4 in the morning. I need you to set up a meeting with Hernandez. Just me and him, neutral ground, no weapons. Boss, that's suicide. I know. Do it anyway. And Julian? Starting tomorrow, I want a full audit of every operation we run. Everything. I need to know exactly how deep the blood goes. Another long silence. Then, are you dying? Did the doctors find something? No. Dominic laughed, bitter and broken. I think I might be trying to start living. Get some sleep. Tomorrow changes everything. He hung up before Julian could argue and sat watching the sunrise paint Bronzeville in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in this neighborhood, an 8-year-old girl fought for life because of choices he'd made. Somewhere else, Imani Wright probably wasn't sleeping, keeping vigil for a child whose name he didn't even know. 20 years building an empire from blood. And one woman in a burgundy dress had looked at him like he was still human enough to do better. Maybe that was the real weakness love created, not making you vulnerable to attack, but to your own conscience. Making you see yourself through eyes that still believed in redemption. He started the car, pointing it toward Mercy Hospital. He wouldn't go in, didn't have the right. But he could make sure the girl had the best doctors money could buy, the best care possible. He could start making choices that hurt fewer people. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even close. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, he was starting to remember, always required blood. You just got to choose whose. The little girl's name was Destiny Thompson, and she survived. Imani learned this at 6 a.m. from an exhausted doctor who didn't question why the hospital's administration had suddenly allocated their best pediatric surgeon and a private room to a girl from Bronzeville whose family had Medicaid. She didn't ask because she was afraid of the answer, afraid it would confirm what she already suspected. That Dominic Kane had made a phone call. That blood money could buy miracles when it wanted to. That she'd asked a monster for help and he'd given it. She sat with Destiny's grandmother in the ICU waiting room, holding the woman's weathered hand, wondering what it meant to be grateful for mercy from someone whose choices had created the need for mercy in the first place. It felt like a trap, or maybe like drowning in moral complexity when she'd built her life on clear lines between right and wrong. Someone paid for all this, Destiny's grandmother, Miss Gloria, whispered, tears streaming down her face. The surgery, the private room, everything. The social worker said it was an anonymous benefactor. But nothing's anonymous, baby. Someone wanted us to know they were watching. Imani squeezed her hand, saying nothing. Because what could she say? Yes, it was the man whose empire put your granddaughter in that hospital bed. And somehow that makes it worse, not better? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Is she going to make it? She stared at it for a long moment before typing back. Yes. Thanks to the best doctors money can buy. Your money, I assume? The response came quickly. Would you prefer I hadn't? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Would she? If he'd done nothing, Destiny might have died. But his help felt like being forced to thank the arsonist for calling the fire department. I'd prefer you stopped creating situations that require your guilt money to fix, she typed, then added, but yes. Thank you for her life. Even if you're part of why it was endangered. No response came. She pocketed her phone and went back to keeping vigil, the weight of compromise settling on her shoulders like a coat she couldn't take off. Dominic read her message 3 times before pocketing his phone. He was standing in the wreckage of what used to be one of his primary distribution warehouses, now a charred skeleton of steel beams and ash. Hernandez's people had hit it overnight, burning $1 million in inventory and sending a message written in smoke visible for miles. War had been declared. Again. Always. We hit them back twice as hard, Julian said, his voice flat with the inevitability of violence. Send them a message they can't ignore. No. Dominic walked through the debris, his shoes crunching on broken glass. Set up the meeting with Hernandez. Today. Boss. That's not a request, Julian. It's an order. He turned, and something in his expression made his lieutenant step back. This ends. All of it. I'm tired of building on ashes. You're tired. Julian's composure cracked, revealing the concern beneath. Or you're distracted. Because I've watched you for 2 decades, and I've never seen you hesitate like this. Not until some community organizer in a red dress looked at you like you were human. Dominic's jaw tightened. Watch yourself. Someone has to. You know what they're saying? The other crews, the suppliers, even our own people? That you're going soft. That Kane's lost his edge. And in our business, soft means dead. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice. I've been loyal to you since the beginning. I'm being loyal now. Whatever's in your head about that woman, about going legitimate, about redemption or whatever fantasy you're chasing, it's going to get you killed. And probably her too. Then set up the goddamn meeting so I can end this before anyone else ends up in a hospital. Dominic's voice was cold, final. And Julian? My personal life is not your concern. My strategy is. Trust that I know what I'm doing. But he didn't. That was the terrifying truth. For the first time in 20 years, Dominic Kane was navigating without a map, driven by something that felt dangerously like conscience and catastrophically like hope. The meeting with Hernandez happened in an empty restaurant in Pilsen, neutral territory where both men had enough leverage to ensure mutual destruction if either violated the truce. Dominic arrived alone, as requested, walking past the Mexican cartel lieutenant's bodyguards with the confidence of someone who decided dying honestly was preferable to living as a monster. Hernandez was younger than him, mid-30s, handsome in a cruel way, wearing expensive casual clothes that broadcast wealth without pretension. He smiled when Dominic entered, the grin of a shark recognizing a peer. Kane. I expected you to bring an army. I expected you to have already killed me. Dominic sat across from him, no weapons, no backup, just the reckless faith of someone trying to become someone else. Guess we both enjoy surprises. You've gotten interesting lately. Hernandez poured tequila into 2 glasses, sliding one across. Word is you're going soft. That a woman's gotten into your head. Is it true? Dominic didn't touch the drink. What's true is that I'm tired of bleeding my city dry. What's true is that we've been fighting over territory for 5 years, and it's cost us both more than we've gained. What's true is that there's a little girl in a hospital because of our war, and I'm done pretending that's just business. So you want peace? Hernandez laughed. Just like that? After everything? I want out. The words tasted like admission and liberation. I'm liquidating the drug operations, The protection rackets, all of it. Going fully legitimate. The question is whether you're going to let me, or if you're going to force me to burn everything down on my way out. The laughter died. Hernandez studied him with the intensity of someone recalculating odds. You're serious? Completely. Why? Dominic thought of Imani's eyes on that balcony, seeing him clearly for the first time in decades. Because I remembered I used to be someone who thought poverty was the worst thing that could happen to a person. Turns out becoming the thing that perpetuates poverty is worse. Philosophical Kane. I don't trust it. Hernandez leaned back. But I'm a businessman. You exit clean, territory, operations, contacts, all of it transferred over 6-month timeline, and we don't have problems. You try to play both sides, keep a hand in while pretending to go legit, then we have very permanent problems. 6 months is too long. People will think I'm weak, try to fill the vacuum. 3 months, full transfer, and I'll make sure my people know you're not an enemy. Clean exit. 4 months. And you broker introductions to your political connections. If I'm taking over your territory, I need your alderman. Dominic's stomach turned at the thought, handing over the corruption infrastructure he'd spent years building, enabling Hernandez to do everything he'd done. But what choice existed? This was the price of exit, the tax on redemption. Done. He extended his hand. Hernandez took it, his grip firm. I hope she's worth it, Kane. Because you're burning an empire for a woman who probably still thinks you're the devil. Maybe I am, Dominic said. But devils can abdicate. He left the restaurant alive, surprised and somehow disappointed. Part of him had hoped Hernandez would refuse, would force the violent conclusion that felt more familiar than this uncertain peace. Reform was harder than war. War had rules he understood. His phone rang as he reached his car. Imani. I need to talk to you, she said without preamble. In person. Tonight. Where? The community center. 8 p.m. Come alone, Mr. Kane. And come prepared to answer some very difficult questions. She hung up before he could respond. Dominic stood in the parking lot, the Mexican sun warming his shoulders, and felt something he'd thought he'd killed, nervousness. Not fear, he'd faced death enough times to be casual about it. But nervousness at the prospect of disappointing someone whose opinion somehow mattered more than survival. This was the weakness they warned about. The vulnerability that love created. And he was walking toward it willingly, like a man toward salvation or execution, no longer sure there was a difference. The Bronzeville Community Center occupied a converted church, its stained glass windows depicting saints who probably would have objected to Dominic's presence. He arrived at 8 exactly, finding Imani alone in the main hall, surrounded by photographs of neighborhood children, their faces bright with the kind of hope his empire had spent years extinguishing. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back, her face tied in a way that made her more beautiful, real, human, achingly present. You came, she said. You called. I wasn't sure you would. Thought maybe you'd send some intermediary, keep your distance from the mess. She gestured to a folding table with 2 chairs, both woefully inadequate for the conversation ahead. Sit. Please. He sat, conscious of how out of place he looked, Tom Ford suit in a community center, blood money trying to buy audience with conscience. Imani took the other chair, folding her hands in front of her. I've spent the last 3 days investigating you. More thoroughly than before. And I found something strange. What's that? Patterns changing. Shell companies being dissolved. Real estate holdings being quietly sold. Drug distribution networks, which I'm not supposed to know about but absolutely do, suddenly disrupted from the inside. Her eyes locked on his. You're dismantling your empire, aren't you? He could lie. Should lie. Instead, yes. Why? Because an 8-year-old girl named Destiny almost died because of choices I made. Because you looked at me like I was capable of being better, and I couldn't stop wondering if you might be right. Because I'm 43 years old and I've spent 20 years building something I'm no longer sure I want to exist. He exhaled slowly. Because you asked me to fix it, and this is the only way I know how. Imani was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Do you know what scares me most about you, Dominic? The use of his first name hit harder than any accusation. What? That I'm starting to believe you're sincere. That this isn't some elaborate manipulation, but an actual crisis of conscience. And that terrifies me because it means you're not the simple villain I need you to be. She leaned forward. I can fight a monster. I know how to organize against clear evil. But a man trying to change? A man whose redemption might actually be real? That's complicated in ways I'm not equipped to handle. You could walk away. Let me implode on my own. I could, she agreed. Probably should. But Destiny's alive because of you, and 3 other families have mysteriously been relocated out of gang territory in the last week. Anonymously, of course, but I'm not stupid. You're trying to do better, and I can't turn away from that. Even though every smart instinct I have says you're dangerous. I am dangerous, he said quietly. That doesn't stop being true just because I'm trying to be less so. I know. She reached across the table, her hand stopping inches from his, close enough to bridge, far enough to retreat. So here's what I'm proposing. You want to dismantle your empire? I'll help. I know community organizing, I know how to create legitimate opportunities, I know the people and structures that could fill the vacuum you're leaving. But I do it on my terms, with complete transparency, and the second I think you're playing me, I burn it all down and you with it. Why would you risk that? Because change is scary and hard, and you'll need someone who actually cares about these communities to make sure you don't just replace one bad system with another. She held his gaze. And because I think maybe you're not beyond saving. I've spent my life believing in second chances for people everyone else wrote off. Seems hypocritical to deny you one just because your sins are more expensive. Dominic looked at her outstretched hand, the bridge between who he'd been and who he might become. Taking it meant accountability, meant placing his transformation in the hands of someone who would demand honesty he'd spent decades avoiding. It was the most terrifying thing he'd contemplated since deciding to build an empire from blood. He took her hand. Her skin was warm, her grip firm, and the contact sent something electric through him, not desire, or not only desire, but recognition. Like touching a mirror and finding it solid, real, offering reflection and support simultaneously. Deal, he said. But Imani, you should know that by associating with me, even to reform me, you're painting a target on yourself. My enemies won't understand nuance. They'll just see you as leverage. Then I guess you'll have to make sure I'm not. She smiled, fierce and slightly reckless. Besides, I've been painting targets on myself my whole life. Comes with the territory of giving a damn. What would you do if someone you viewed as your enemy asked for help becoming better? Turn away or take the risk? Let us know in the comments. They worked through the night, Imani's laptop between them, mapping out a transition strategy that could dismantle a criminal empire while minimizing the violence that typically accompanied power vacuums. She was brilliant, seeing connections he'd missed, understanding community dynamics his business education had never taught him. And somewhere around 2 a.m., leaning close to review a document, their shoulders touching, Dominic realized he was laughing. Actually laughing, at something Imani had said about alderman corruption being amateur hour compared to church ladies fighting over bake sale territory. When was the last time he'd laughed? What? She asked, smiling at his expression. Nothing. Just this. You. The strangeness of planning my own empire's destruction with someone who, a week ago, thought I was irredeemable. I never said irredeemable. She closed the laptop, the movement bringing her face closer to his. I said you made choices that hurt people. Past tense. The question was always whether you'd keep making those choices. And now? Now I'm watching you choose differently. It doesn't erase the past. Dominic. Destiny still got shot. Rodriguez still died. Those families are still displaced. You don't get absolution just because you're trying to do better. I know. But. She bit her lip, vulnerability cracking through her armor. But trying matters. And maybe that's enough to build on. The space between them had contracted to nothing, just breath and possibility and the dangerous territory of two people who should be enemies discovering they might be something else entirely. Imani, he said, her name a question and a warning. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. Catastrophically bad. You're still half a crime lord. I'm supposed to be organizing against you. You are organizing against me. Toward a better version, but still. This violates every principle I have about not fraternizing with. He kissed her. Or she kissed him. Later, neither could agree on who moved first, just that the distance collapsed and suddenly they were tasting each other like drowning people taste air, desperate and necessary and absolutely inevitable. When they broke apart, both breathless, Imani touched her lips like confirming they were real. "We can't do this," she said. "Probably not. People will think I sold out. That you bought me. I know. Your enemies will use me against you. Yes. And we barely know each other. This could be disaster. Almost certainly." He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But for the first time in 20 years, I feel like I'm making a choice that might save me instead of damn me. So if disaster is the price of that, I'll pay it gladly." She kissed him again, softer this time, like sealing a deal or blessing a fool. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Don't make me regret this, Dominic Kane. Don't make me regret believing you could be better." "I'll try not to." He rested his forehead against hers. "But Imani, if this goes wrong, if my past comes for us, run. Don't try to save me. Just run. That's not how I'm built." "I know. That's what scares me most." They sat in the quiet community center surrounded by photographs of children whose futures depended on people like them making better choices, and Dominic felt the weight of his empire shifting, no longer an armor but a responsibility, no longer power but burden. Love hadn't made him weak. It had made him accountable. Had given him something more valuable than control, a reason to deserve better than what he'd become. Outside, Chicago slept, unaware that in a converted church in Bronzeville, a man built from blood was learning how to bleed for something worth saving. The question was whether the empire he'd built would let him change without demanding its final price. That answer was coming, sooner than either of them knew. The first threat came disguised as opportunity. Dominic was in his office, the legitimate 1/20th floor of the building he actually owned under his real name, when Julian walked in with an expression that broadcast trouble in every line of his face. "We have a problem." Elaborate. Dominic didn't look up from the contracts he was reviewing, property transfers that would dissolve another piece of his criminal infrastructure. "Hernandez is getting impatient. Says the transition's taking too long, that your people are stalling. He thinks you're playing him." "I'm not. I know that. But some of our mid-level guys? They're not ready to hand over territory to the Mexicans. They're loyal to you, boss. They don't understand why you're dismantling everything we built." Julian sat across from him uninvited. "And there's something else. Word on the street is that Viktor Kozlov heard about your Reformation project." Dominic's pen stopped moving. Viktor Kozlov, Russian mafia, brutally efficient, and a competitor he'd managed to keep at bay through reputation alone. The kind of man who saw weakness the way sharks smelled blood. And he's interested in the power vacuum. Wants to move into Chicago, establish operations in the South Side. Figures if Kane's going soft, now's the time to push. Let him try. I'm out of that business. Are you? Julian's voice carried an edge Dominic had never heard before. Because from where I'm sitting, you're halfway in, halfway out, the worst possible position. You're not dangerous enough to scare off predators, but you're not clean enough to be safe from law enforcement. You're vulnerable, boss. And so is she. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Explain. Julian slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, Imani leaving the community center at night, Imani at the grocery store, Imani laughing with children at an after-school program. Professional surveillance photos, the kind that said someone was studying her routines, her vulnerabilities, her life. Kozlov's people have been watching her for 3 days. They know she's important to you. They know she's the reason you're reforming. Julian's voice softened with something like pity. Boss, they're going to use her to draw you out. To force you back into being the man you were, or to eliminate you while you're distracted trying to protect her. Dominic's hands clenched on the photographs, his carefully controlled facade cracking. When? I don't know. But soon. Kozlov doesn't move unless he's sure of success, and he's been asking very specific questions about Ms. Wright's security. Or lack thereof. Every instinct Dominic had spent 20 years honing screamed at him to act, to disappear Imani somewhere safe, to unleash the violence he'd been restraining, to remind Chicago why his name used to inspire fear. The old Dominic would have already planned the retaliation, the demonstration that would make Kozlov regret even thinking about leverage. But the man Imoni was helping him become? That man had to find another way. Set up a meeting with Kozlov. Tonight. Neutral ground. He won't come. He's not stupid enough to. Tell him I'm offering a trade. Chicago territory, clean exit, no resistance, in exchange for leaving Ms. Wright untouched. He gets what he wants without a war. Dominic's voice was steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. Set it up, Julian. That's an order. Julian stood slowly, studying his boss like a stranger. You really love her, don't you? This woman you've known for what, 2 weeks? I don't know what I feel, Dominic admitted. But I know that if something happens to her because of me, because of what I was, then everything I'm trying to become is worthless. She's the proof that change is possible. Protecting her isn't weakness, it's the whole point. Or it's the thing that gets you killed. But Julian nodded, accepting the order even as he questioned it. I'll set it up. But boss? Have a backup plan. Men like Kozlov don't make deals, they make examples. After Julian left, Dominic sat alone with the photographs of Imoni, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't since he was 15 and afraid. Fear for himself he understood. That was just survival math. But fear for someone else? That was new territory, unmapped and treacherous. He picked up his phone, typed a message to her. We need to talk. Tonight. It's important. Her response came quickly. Can't tonight. Big community meeting about the new housing initiative. Tomorrow? No. Tonight. After your meeting. I'll explain everything, but Imoni, please be careful. Stay in public places. Stay visible. A long pause, then, you're scaring me. Good. Fear keeps you safe. I'll see you at 10. The community center. He pocketed the phone and stared at his city through the window. 20 years building an empire, and it took 2 weeks of love to make it all come crashing down. The irony wasn't lost on him. Neither was the terror. Imoni's community meeting was packed, over 100 people crammed into the center, all there to discuss the new affordable housing initiative that Dominic's foundation was funding. It was part of the transition plan they developed together, converting his empty luxury developments into mixed-income housing, creating genuine opportunity instead of just displacement. She stood at the front, answering questions, feeling the electric hope in the room. This was why she'd risked everything to work with Dominic, because change on this scale required resources she didn't have, and he was offering them without strings. Or so she'd believed. His text messages gnawed at her. Stay in public places. Stay visible. What did that mean? What had changed? Ms. Wright. An older man in the back row raised his hand. This foundation funding all this, it's Kane's money, right? How do we know this isn't just another way for him to control our neighborhood? Because I'm overseeing every dollar, Imoni responded. Complete transparency, community input on all decisions. Mr. Kane has agreed to. The lights went out. Not flickering, complete, instant darkness. The kind that came from cutting power at the source, not from a blown fuse. Imoni's heart kicked into overdrive as confused voices rose around her. Everyone stay calm, she called out, reaching for her phone's flashlight. Just a power outage, happens all. The emergency exit door slammed open. Dark figures flooded in, 3, 4, she couldn't tell in the chaos. People screamed. Someone grabbed her arm with bruising force. Come quietly or people start dying, a voice with a Russian accent whispered in her ear. Your choice, Ms. Wright. Terror and rage warred in her chest. She opened her mouth to scream, to fight, to do anything. But then she saw the gun pressed against Mrs. Henderson's temple, the elderly woman frozen in fear. Quietly, the voice repeated. Imoni went quietly. Dominic was halfway to the community center when his phone rang, a blocked number that sent ice through his veins even before he answered. Kane. Viktor Kozlov's voice was smooth, educated, utterly devoid of mercy. I believe you wanted to make a deal. Consider this my counteroffer. Where is she? Safe. For now. I must compliment you. She's quite brave. Didn't scream, didn't beg. Just asked that we not hurt anyone else. Very noble. Very foolish. A pause pregnant with threat. Here's what happens next. You meet me, alone, no weapons, no Julian, no backup. The old Port Authority building on the waterfront. 1 hour. You come as the man you used to be, ready to prove your empire still has teeth, or I send Ms. right back to her community in pieces. Your choice. If you hurt her. You'll what? Call the police? We both know that's not how this works. 1 hour. Kane. Come ready to be the monster, or lose everything you pretend to love. The line went dead. Dominic pulled over, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. This was the choice, then. The moment where everything he'd been trying to become collided with everything he was. Kozlov wasn't interested in deals or territory, he wanted dominance, wanted to prove that Kane's reformation was weakness, wanted to restore the natural order where violence was the only language that mattered. The old Dominic would already be armed, would be calling in every favor and enforcer he had, would be planning the kind of overwhelming violence that ended threats permanently. That man could save Imani. That man could walk into Kozlov's trap and walk out covered in blood. But that man was also the reason Imani was in danger in the first place. He picked up his phone, pulled up Julian's number. His finger hovered over the call button. One tap and he'd have an army, have the tools to do this the old way. Instead, he opened a different contact. FBI agent Sarah Morrison, the woman who'd been investigating him for 5 years, who'd never quite gotten enough evidence but had never stopped trying. He typed, I have information on Victor Kozlov's Chicago operations. Meets me in 30 minutes at Millennium Park, I'll give you everything. In exchange, you raid the old Port Authority building in exactly 1 hour. Come heavy. Sending it felt like suicide. Felt like betrayal of everything he'd built, every code he'd lived by. Criminals didn't call cops. Didn't trade information. Didn't trust the law to solve problems that violence had always handled. But he wasn't that anymore. Was trying not to be. The response came in seconds. This better not be a setup, Kane. 30 minutes. Come alone. He drove to Millennium Park feeling like a man heading toward execution. Maybe he was. The FBI would want everything. Names, locations, evidence that would dismantle not just Kozlov's operation but the remnants of his own. He'd be painting targets on former associates, violating codes that men had died for violating. But Imani was alive because he'd believed in redemption. And redemption required sacrifice he wasn't sure he could survive. Agent Morrison met him by Cloud Gate, the famous bin sculpture reflecting their conversation in distorted chrome. She was mid-40s, sharp-eyed, wearing a pantsuit and the expression of someone who'd learned to trust nothing. Talk fast, Kane. What do you have? Everything. He handed her a flash drive, one he'd prepared weeks ago, insurance he'd hoped never to use. Kozlov's operations, supply chains, personnel, financials. Enough to bury him for life. But there's a condition. You don't make conditions. He has someone. An innocent civilian, Imani, right? He's using her as bait to draw me into a confrontation at the old Port Authority building. I'm giving you Kozlov and his entire network, but you have to raid that location. 1 hour from now. And you have to get her out alive. Morrison studied him, calculating odds. Why not just go in yourself? The Dominic Kane I know would already have 20 men ready to burn the place down. Because that Dominic Kane is why she's in danger. His voice cracked slightly. And because I'm trying to be someone who solves problems without adding to the body count. Can you do this or not? She looked at the flash drive, then back at him. This is everything? No holding back. Everything. Including enough to charge me, if you want. But later. After you save her. Why should I believe this isn't some elaborate setup? Because I'm standing here asking the FBI for help instead of doing what every instinct I have tells me to do. Because I'm betting that the law can actually work, even though 20 years of experience says otherwise. He met her eyes. Because she believed I could change, and if I go in there as the man I was, then she was wrong. And I'd rather die than prove her wrong. Morrison pocketed the flash drive. 1 hour. But Kane, after this, you and I are having a very long conversation about your own operations. I know. He turned to leave, then stopped. Agent Morrison? Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This could still go sideways in 100 ways. He walked away, heading toward the Port Authority building despite everything, because there was no version of this where he just waited safely while Imani was in danger. The FBI would come, he had to believe that. But he'd be there too, unarmed, defenseless, trusting in law and mercy instead of violence and fear. It was the most terrifying thing he'd ever done. And maybe, finally, the rightest. The old Port Authority building was a skeleton of industrial Chicago, abandoned for a decade and perfect for the kind of meeting where people didn't walk out. Dominic entered through the main doors, hands visible, no weapons, just a man walking into darkness with nothing but faith he'd recently learned. Kozlov waited in what used to be the main cargo bay, surrounded by 6 armed men and Imoni, tied to a chair, bruised but alive, her eyes widening when she saw him. Kane. Kozlov was younger than expected, maybe 35, dressed in expensive casual wear that broadcast confidence. I almost didn't believe you'd come alone. Unarmed. The great Dominic Kane, vulnerable. It's poetic, really. Let her go. Your issue is with me, not her. My issue is that you've become weak. That your weakness creates opportunity. That your transformation, he said the word like it was obscene, suggests that empire can be dissolved by something as pathetic as love. I can't let that narrative stand. So what? You kill us both, take over Chicago, prove that violence always wins. Dominic moved closer, positioning himself between Kozlov and Imoni. That's not strength. That's just being predictable. Dominic, don't, Imoni said, her voice steady despite the fear. Don't give him what he wants. She's right, Kozlov said. I want you to revert. Want you to kill me. Prove you're still the monster, still dangerous. Then I win. Either I'm dead but proved my point, or you slip and I kill you. Either way, the fairy tale ends. Or there's a third option. Dominic's voice was calm, the decision already made. I don't fight you. I don't become the monster. The FBI raids this location in approximately, he checked his watch, 3 minutes. And you go to prison, where you're just another violent man who mistook brutality for power. The color drained from Kozlov's face. You didn't. I did. Gave them everything. Your operations, your people, enough evidence to bury you. Because that's what change looks like. Not switching from one kind of violence to another, but choosing a completely different game. He glanced at Imoni, seeing the mixture of shock and something like pride in her expression. You were right. I could choose differently. So I am. Kozlov's gun rose, pointing at Dominic's chest. Then you die proving nothing. Maybe. But she lives. And the empire I built? Ends here. Ended by me choosing law over vengeance. That's worth dying for. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Kozlov's finger tightened on the trigger, calculation warring with rage on his face. Then the doors exploded inward, FBI SWAT, tactical gear, overwhelming force. Drop your weapons. FBI. The next 30 seconds were chaos, Kozlov's men surrendering, someone cutting Imoni free, agents swarming the building with the precision of people who'd planned this raid in 45 frantic minutes. Dominic stood in the center of it, untouched, unarmed, watching his old world be dismantled by the law he'd spent 20 years evading. Agent Morrison walked up to him, cuffing his hands professionally. Dominic Kane, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and about 40 other charges. You have the right to remain silent. But Dominic wasn't listening. He was watching Imoni, free now, being checked by paramedics, her eyes locked on his across the chaos. She was crying, he realized, and somehow smiling through the tears. She mouthed 2 words. Thank you. He mouthed back, I love you. Then Agent Morrison was leading him away, toward squad cars and processing and the legal consequences of 20 years of empire. Toward prison, probably, and the dismantling of everything he'd built from blood. But Imoni was alive. He'd chosen law over violence, redemption over reputation, love over power. And for the first time in 20 years, Dominic Kane felt clean. The empire was dead. Long live the man. 18 months later. The visiting room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Teyote smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. But Imoni Wright walked through it like she owned the place, confident, purposeful, carrying a folder thick with documents and a smile that made the fluorescent lighting feel less oppressive. Dominic stood when she entered, the orange jumpsuit a strange contrast to the Tom Ford suit she'd first seen him in. Prison had changed him, leaner, the gray in his hair more pronounced, the hard edges somehow softened by time and accountability. But his eyes, when they found hers, held something she'd never seen in those first meetings. Peace. You're early, he said as they sat across from each other, a scarred table between them but no longer any real distance. I have news. She slid the folder across. The judge signed off this morning. You're getting out. His hand stilled on the folder. Imani, I was sentenced to 5 years. It's only been 18 months. 18 months of model behavior, complete cooperation with ongoing investigations, and testimony that helped dismantle 3 major criminal organizations. She leaned forward, unable to contain her excitement. Plus, your lawyer, the very expensive one you hired specifically for this, argued that your transformation was genuine, that you'd voluntarily surrendered everything, that you posed no threat to society. The prosecution didn't even fight it that hard. Agent Morrison actually testified on your behalf. She what? Said, and I quote, Mr. Kane made a choice that saved a civilian life and led to the largest organized crime bust in Chicago history. He chose law over violence when everything in his history suggested he'd do the opposite. That kind of transformation deserves recognition. Imani's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Dominic, you're getting out in 3 weeks. Time served, parole for the rest, community service requirements, but you're coming home. He opened the folder with shaking hands, reading the legal documents that represented freedom, second chances, the official recognition that people could change. When he looked up, tears were streaming down his face, the first time she'd seen him cry in the dozens of visits she'd made over 18 months. I don't deserve this, he whispered. Maybe not. But you've earned the chance to keep becoming someone who might. She reached across the table, taking his hands in hers, technically against the rules, but the guard pretended not to notice. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Build something better. With you, if you'll have me. Not an empire this time. Just a life. A real one. His voice was rough with emotion. Imani, these 18 months, you didn't have to visit. Didn't have to wait. Didn't have to keep believing in me when everyone else said you were a fool. Everyone else doesn't know you like I do. She squeezed his hands. Besides, I've been busy. Someone had to manage all those community development projects while you were in here learning humility. He laughed, actual, real laughter that transformed his face. How's that going? See for yourself. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. The affordable housing development on 47th? Fully occupied, mixed income, exactly like we planned. The community center expansion? Opening next month. Your foundation, well, our foundation now, has funded 12 small businesses in Bronzeville, created a scholarship program, and partnered with 3 churches on violence intervention. The photos showed transformed neighborhoods, smiling families, children playing in spaces that used to be dangerous. Dominic stared at them like they were miracles, which maybe they were, the evidence that blood money could be laundered into genuine good, that empires could be dismantled and rebuilt as community. You did all this, he said. We did all this. Your resources, your connections, redirected properly, made it possible. I just made sure it actually helped people instead of just making you feel better about yourself. She grinned. Though I won't lie, watching Alderman squirm when I showed up with your power of attorney? Deeply satisfying. I bet. He studied the photos, lingering on one of Destiny Thompson, now 9 years old, smiling brightly, fully recovered, cutting the ribbon at a new playground. She's okay. She's thriving. Wants to be a doctor now. Says she's going to help people like the doctors who saved her. Her grandmother asks about you every week. Tell her. He paused, searching for words. Tell her I'm sorry. That I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. Tell her yourself in 3 weeks. Imani stood, their visiting time almost up. Dominic Kane, you've got 3 weeks to figure out what kind of man you want to be in the world. I suggest you choose wisely. I already did. 18 months ago, when I chose you over everything else. He stood too, wanting to hold her, to kiss her, to do all the things institutional walls prevented. I love you. I should have said it more, said it first, said it without qualifications. I love you, Imani Wright, and you are the best choice I ever made. I love you too. Now get out of here in 3 weeks so we can start the rest of our lives. We have a lot of work to do. The guard called time. Imani walked toward the door, then turned back. Hey, Dominic. Yeah. Empire from blood, remember? You built it and it almost destroyed you. But we're building something new now. An empire from love. And that one. She smiled, fierce and beautiful and absolutely certain. That one's going to last. 3 weeks later, Dominic walked out of FCI Teyote into brilliant October sunlight, wearing civilian clothes that felt strange after 18 months of Orange, carrying a single box of belongings that represented all he'd been allowed to keep from his old life. Imani was waiting by a beat-up Honda Civic. Her car, practical and perfect, nothing like the luxury vehicles he used to own. She was wearing jeans and that same Bronzeville Strong t-shirt from the night they'd met, her hair in natural coils, her smile bright enough to compete with the sun. "Your chariot awaits," she said, gesturing to the car. "It's beautiful. It's 15 years old and the air conditioning sometimes works. Still beautiful." He dropped his box and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was oxygen and he'd been underwatered for 18 months. Which wasn't far from the truth. She held him back just as tightly, her face pressed against his chest, breathing him in. "Welcome home." "Where's home?" "I'll show you." Home turned out to be a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Bronzeville, walking distance from the community center, in a building Dominic's foundation had converted to affordable housing. His apartment, because Imani had insisted, they maintained separate spaces until he was properly reformed, was on the 3rd floor, sparsely furnished but clean, with windows that overlooked the neighborhood he'd once helped destroy and was now helping rebuild. "It's not a penthouse," Imani said, watching his reaction. "It's perfect." He walked to the window, looking out at the street where kids were playing basketball, where Mrs. Henderson was tending her garden, where life was happening without fear or violence. "This is what winning looks like, isn't it? Not dominance, just belonging." "Exactly." She joined him at the window. "Your parole officer will be by tomorrow. You've got community service starting Monday, teaching financial literacy to formerly incarcerated people trying to rebuild their lives. The foundation board meets Wednesday. They're thrilled to have you back, by the way. And Friday." "Friday." She turned to face him, suddenly shy in a way she never was. "Friday, I was hoping you'd come to dinner. At my place. I've been practicing cooking, and I promise I'm only slightly terrible at it now." "Imani, right? Are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking if the reformed crime lord wants to eat my potentially tragic attempt at lasagna and maybe talk about what we're building together." "So yes. A date." She touched his face gently. "We've been doing this backwards. Crisis, transformation, prison visits, and now finally just getting to know each other without empires and FBI raids and existential drama. Think you can handle normal?" "I have no idea." He covered her hand with his. "But I'm willing to try if you are." "Good. Because normal is terrifying and I'm going to need you to be terrified with me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the desperate kiss from that first night in the community center, but something steadier, built on 18 months of visits and letters and choosing each other through consequence and change. When they broke apart, she was smiling through tears. "What?" he asked. "Just, you're here. Actually here. I spent 18 months being strong, being certain, being the one who believed in redemption. But I was also terrified you wouldn't make it, that prison would break you or you'd revert or that everything we were trying to build would collapse. And now you're here and it's real and I'm allowed to just feel it." "Feel what?" "Happy. Scared. Hopeful. All of it." She wiped her eyes. "Love made you weak," the title said. "But it didn't, did it? It made you brave enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to choose differently. It made you human again." "It made me want to be worthy of you," he corrected. "That's what love did. Gave me a reason to be better than I was." The first few months were harder than either expected. Dominic struggled with the transition from power to powerlessness, from being feared to being just another parolee trying to rebuild. He taught financial literacy classes where former criminals looked at him with suspicion, knowing his history, wondering if his transformation was real or just another con. He attended endless parole meetings, therapy sessions mandated by his release, community service requirements that had him scrubbing graffiti and sorting donations at homeless shelters. The man who'd once moved millions in a phone call now counted out change at the community center's coffee cart, making minimum wage and learning humility one transaction at a time. But Imani was there through all of it, not coddling him, not making it easier, but standing beside him as he learned who he was without the armor of empire. She challenged him when he slipped into old patterns of control, celebrated when he chose vulnerability over strength, loved him through the messy, difficult work of becoming genuinely different. And slowly, the neighborhood that had every reason to hate him began to cautiously accept him. Mrs. Henderson was first. 6 months after his release, she approached him at the community center, her face unreadable. Mr. Kane. He stood, expecting accusation, prepared for the judgment he absolutely deserved. Mrs. Henderson. My grandson Dante, the one in the wheelchair from your war, his starting college next fall. Engineering program at Northwestern, full scholarship from your foundation. She paused, emotion working in her face. I spent a lot of years hating you. What you represented, what you did to our neighborhood. Part of me still wants to hate you. You have every right to. Maybe. But Dante told me something last week. He said, Grandma, that man paid for my medical bills, funded my physical therapy, set up my college scholarship, and never once asked for credit or thanks. He's trying to make amends. And I realized my grandson, who had every reason to be bitter, has chosen to believe in second chances. She extended her hand. So I'm going to try to believe too. Welcome home, Mr. Kane. For real this time. He took her hand, his vision blurring. Thank you. That means more than you know. She nodded and walked away, but the gesture rippled. Others began acknowledging him, cautiously at first, then with growing warmth. The community that had been his victim was choosing, slowly and carefully, to let him become part of its healing. 1 year after his release, Dominic and Imani stood in what used to be his empty luxury development on 47th Street. Now the Bronzeville Community Innovation Center, a space for entrepreneurs, artists, educators, and dreamers. The grand opening was packed with hundreds of people, music and laughter filling spaces that used to echo with emptiness. You did it, Imani said, her hand in his, watching the celebration. Turned blood money into something real. We did it, he corrected. None of this happens without you believing I could change. None of it happens without you choosing to change. She leaned against him, comfortable in a way that still amazed him after 2 years. So what now? You've dismantled your empire, paid your debt to society, rebuilt what you destroyed. What does Dominic Kane do with the rest of his life? Be worthy of you. He turned to face her fully. Build communities instead of empires. Teach young men that power comes from creating value, not controlling it. Love you every single day like you're the miracle that saved my life, which you are. He pulled a small box from his pocket, dropping to one knee in the middle of the celebration. Imani's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming. Imani, right? You saw me when I was a monster and believed I could be a man. You risked everything, your reputation, your safety, your heart, on the possibility that I could change. You loved me when I didn't deserve it and stayed when anyone else would have run. His voice cracked with emotion. I built an empire from blood, and it almost destroyed me. But with you, I'm building something better, a life from love. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my days earning the gift you've given me? Yes. She was laughing and crying simultaneously, pulling him up, kissing him while the crowd around them erupted in cheers. Yes. You ridiculous man. Yes. He slid the ring on her finger, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry he would have bought in his old life. This was better. This was real. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you too. My empire builder. My reformed crime lord. My proof that people can change. She pulled back, her eyes searching his. You know what this means, right? You're committing to a life of community organizing, non-profit management, and very mediocre home cooking. No empire, no power, no control. Sounds perfect. Sounds terrifying. That too. He kissed her again, deeper this time. But I'd rather be terrified with you than powerful without you. That's what I learned. That love doesn't make you weak, it makes you care about being strong for the right reasons. Around them, the celebration continued. Former enemies now neighbors, a community rebuilt from the ashes of his empire, children playing in spaces he'd helped create instead of destroy. Destiny Thompson was there with her grandmother, laughing with friends. Jerome, Imani's assistant organizer, was coordinating volunteers. Agent Morrison had even shown up, giving him a respectful nod across the room. This was his empire now. Not built from blood, but from the painful, beautiful work of redemption. Not controlled through fear, but grown through trust earned one day, one choice, one act of genuine change at a time. Dominic Kane had spent 20 years building power that meant nothing. Now he was spending the rest of his life building meaning that mattered. And the woman in his arms, with her fierce heart and unshakable faith in human possibility, was proof that love wasn't weakness. It was the strongest force he'd ever known. 5 years later, at a community center named after Dominic's late mother, a woman who'd cleaned houses on her knees so her son could dream bigger, Imani Kane, née Wright, stood at a podium addressing a crowd of formerly incarcerated people beginning their reentry programs. Beside her, holding their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, Dominic waited his turn to speak. Their daughter had his eyes and Imani's fierce spirit, and she was currently trying to eat the microphone cord. "My husband built an empire from blood," Imani said, her voice carrying across the room. "Spent 20 years accumulating power through violence, fear, and moral compromise. He hurt people, destroyed communities, became the thing he'd sworn to rise above." Dominic listened, no longer flinching at the truth of what he'd been. But then he made a choice. A hard one. A terrifying one. He chose to dismantle everything he'd built, to face consequences, to trust that redemption was possible even for someone like him. She gestured to him, love and pride clear in her expression. "Today, my husband runs the largest reentry program in Illinois. He's helped 300 formerly incarcerated people find jobs, housing, and hope. He's proof that your past doesn't have to be your future, that you can choose, every single day, to be better than you were." She stepped aside, and Dominic approached the podium, his daughter Sophia reaching for his face with sticky toddler hands. "Hi," he said, and the room laughed at the contrast between his serious expression and the child trying to pull his nose off. "Sorry, parenting and public speaking don't always mix well." More laughter, warmer now. "My wife is right. I was a monster. Built an empire that destroyed the same communities I'd come from. And I tell you that not because I'm proud, but because I need you to understand, if I can change, anyone can. Change isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing, every single day, to be a little bit better than you were yesterday." He handed Sophia to Imani and gripped the podium. "You're here because you've made mistakes. Maybe terrible ones. Society says you've paid your debt, but we both know the world doesn't forget. People will judge you. Opportunities will close. It will be hard in ways that aren't fair." His voice gentled. "But here's what I learned. You don't rebuild your life by trying to reclaim who you were. You do it by becoming someone new. Someone who uses their past as wisdom instead of excuse. Someone who chooses love, love for community, for family, for the person you're becoming, over the easy path of returning to what you know." He looked at Imani, at Sophia, at the community center bearing his mother's name. "They say love makes you weak. They're wrong. Love makes you accountable. Makes you want to deserve the people who believe in you. Makes you strong enough to choose vulnerability over power, redemption over reputation, building over destroying." He smiled. "My empire from blood is gone. What I'm building now, with my wife, with this community, with every person in this room who chooses to try, that's the empire that matters. An empire from love. And that one lasts forever." The room erupted in applause. Dominic stepped down, taking Sophia back from Imani, kissing his wife's cheek, feeling the weight of his past balanced by the lightness of his present. He'd been a monster who became a man who became proof that change was possible. And every day, he chose love over blood, community over empire, redemption over reputation. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. It was the best thing he'd ever built. And it started with a woman in a burgundy dress who looked at a monster and saw a man worth saving. Thanks for experiencing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.